Hey everyone, welcome to this great episode. Today I have Kristen Hall, TechCrunch writer, on the show. I've been following Christine's work for a few years right now, since she wrote about enterprise, then she started a lot of fintech stuff, which I love. Now her focus is more on food tech and more B2C stuff. Is that correct?
Yes.
So thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So kind of like my first question is, what are some exciting trends are we seeing in the food tech industry in the past year or so?
I definitely wanted to start out with the fact that, with recent news, we now have two companies, Upside Foods and Good Meat, with kind of what I quote unquote, the blessing by the US Food and Drug Administration, that their cultivated meat production methods are safe. And it sounds like once these companies can get through some of the final hurdles like labeling and other approvals by the US Department of Agriculture, I think we could see their cultivated products, especially I think they both focus on chicken, in the US. And as Good Meat's products have already been sold in Singapore and have been for a few years now. So this gives them like another country to get their products in.
Why do you think the US are a bit more harsh in terms of kind of like their criteria for approving some of those products?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have to be. I think that I think there's a lot of different kinds of things going on, especially with the way that I mean the FDA is so stringent about things that we put in our body. So I think it's only natural that any kind of food they're really trying to make sure that it's okay. And this is a new thing. I mean, it's new technology that's creating food, from animal cells. It's not like everyone knows about slaughtering meat and all that kind of stuff, but this is, a very different method. And so you have to, I think it's just, education that is needed to make sure that people know what's going on and, how are you creating this. I think it's like anything else. And so I think it just takes a long time, especially when the technology too is, being changed every day as well.
Hmm. Which
Yeah.
which kind of segments, of the industry are you experiencing the most growth right now? You get tons of pitches every day. You probably see
Yeah.
some sort of trend, right? What kind of sector do you think is
Yes.
really hot right now?
I'd say alternative seafood is one that's kind of creeping up in
Mm.
terms of what's, of growth and innovation. I A couple of months ago I asked, for investors in this space to discuss what's going on, and they, expect a sector to grow faster than the alternative meat space itself. So that's really
Hmm.
interesting. I think that there's a lot going on in kind of the dairy slash egg space, which I've written about as well. I think there, we remember months ago when egg prices were like $7 for a dozen of a dozen eggs, and you kind of wait. You're like, should I buy that? Should I not? And so, I was asking them to see, um, asking people, hey, is a good time for these alternative egg products to like really push themselves to get things out there so that they can, because I mean, if their carton of eggs, if their container of eggs is 7.99 and traditional eggs are also 7.99, it's the perfect time to get people to like, would I like to do this, would I like to do this, A versus B, and get out there. But yeah, I think that's a trend that's kind of coming up as well. Also, I mean, plant-based is still a big category. It's, the technology has gotten better. Companies are doing whole cuts of meat alternatives now with the plant-based, which before, you might remember it was more of like ground meat, or, ground meat alternatives. And now they're actually, producing things that look like an actual steak, or, actual piece of chicken. And there's just a lot of companies in that space that are doing things.
In terms of like I'm sure you probably tasted some of those products, or at least, heard about someone who tested some of
Heard.
those products. What
Yeah.
in terms of flavor, like what are kind of like the differences between the real thing and like plant-based?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there, it depends on who you ask because there's some people who say, "Oh, I can't tell a difference," but I think you
Mm.
can. I think you can tell a difference. There, I don't think that I think that taste and texture are still some things that are vastly being worked on, and I'm sure we'll discuss this later. But I think that there's, um, it's gonna be, I think that that's what's gonna, make or break it for people is really the taste and the texture. Because if it doesn't feel like meat in your mouth, I think it's gonna turn some people off.
Hmm. Which is really interesting because I don't know if you know this, but I'm Jewish, and
Yeah.
and we eat. So I try to eat kosher food. So basically, I've never tasted shrimp in my life,
Okay. Okay.
and
That's never been kosher.
yeah, it's never been kosher. And every time I see shrimps, let me tell you this, Christine, I wanna like dive in and eat this, right? It
Yeah.
looks so good. It looks so good. And I would tell my parents as a young kid, I would tell them like, hey, dad, mom, why is this not kosher? And then I saw, I don't know maybe it was your article or something, but I saw that there's a new plant-based shrimp solution. I forgot the name of the company. If you remember, uh,
Are you talking about like the Ish company?
the ish.
Yeah.
Them, exactly. So
Yes.
so so I was like, hey, I have to order it. I have to order it. And so I think like what the food tech industry is doing right now, in a sense, it's kind of like breaking barriers, right? Someone like me
Yes.
wouldn't be allowed to eat trips before that, and now
Yes.
I can finally
Yes.
taste it, or something
Yeah,
similar to
absolutely.
it.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, anyone who's not allowed to eat maybe pork for religious reasons or
Yeah.
whatever, maybe they could try a pork alternative that is. I mean, I think there's companies doing like sausages and things like that that are made from plant-based and it's, supposed to taste like pork.
I have tasted
Or,
like
or sausage.
I have tasted like an alternative to bacon, but it was meat. It wasn't plant based. It was still like meat, some sort of meat.
Oh,
It was like
yeah.
so that was
Yeah.
nice as well. I won't
That's
lie to you.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously this is a big barrier that the food tech industry is gonna help with. What about like sustainability and food waste and those kind of stuff?
Yes.
What do
I
you
think
think?
that's one of the things that people kind of seem to go hand in hand with food tech these days. So I think that sustainability and food waste are going to play like a big role in this, where, there's the cultivated meat method, for example, is like been said, to estimate to cut like greenhouse gas emissions by up to 96%
Hmm.
via like less water, less land use, and less energy over kind of the traditional ways that animals are being used to make meat. And there's been a lot of processes, or sorry, a lot of studies that show someone's production method for cultivated meat or plant-based meat, etc., how their processes are better in terms of like cutting down on the water, cutting down on the land use and things like that. With regard to food waste, I think it's kind of the same. Um, I think once companies can prove they can make food for demand, it should, that should quickly resonate through like the rest of the food supply chain. So for example, maybe it will help farmers only produce what they need to from certain crops and give them the ability to grow food that they might not have done before because
Hmm.
they didn't know that there was demand. So, I mean, there's no sense in continuing to, make, grow acres and acres of corn, 10 acres of corn if you can only sell two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you something. I'm not sure how much research you've done on the like that's more of like an FDA thing probably, but there's a lot of critics, who say, okay, you're giving me this plant-based burger. It's not meat. It's better for the environment, but I have no idea what, all these ingredients that you're putting in this, all these funny names of ingredients. Do you
Yes.
have you seen of or have you read some research on like the long-term effects or the semi-long-term effects? Because we don't really know yet of like some of this like plant-based products.
Yeah, I haven't read any studies, but to that point, there are companies that are creating sort of like the growth media that's being used to create some of those plant-based foods that are trying to create plant-based versions of some of those chemicals and things that are going into plant-based foods, to kind of help them with connection and, making a burger, right? Burger shape,
Hmm.
a burger shape or whatever. And so there are chemicals, like I remember talking to somebody and she just like kind of like scrunched up her face, like, yeah, some of the stuff that's in there, is like not really as good for you as you think that they are. And so
Hmm.
you know there's companies that are trying to find out, they're trying to create plant-based alternatives to those types of things, like preservatives or whatever it is that people are, that companies are currently using, to kind of cut down on that and make it even more of a genuine plant-based item. But
Hmm.
I haven't seen any studies yet on that show, what the effects of eating something that you can't pronounce in your body. Which, I mean, I think there's a lot of studies out there that say, that are not with plant-based food but are just with regular foods, like, if you eat a ton of like MSG, this is what's going to happen to you. So, I think there's studies like that out there, but not
I've been trying to stay away from it, MSG, personally, for a while.
yeah. Yeah, it's not as prevalent as it was, so I think there's a lot of, you can kind of avoid it.
Yeah, well, people scared other people to a lot of research, and that probably made a lot of restaurants and a lot of
Yeah.
you know products kind of remove it from the ingredients. Thankfully,
Yes, yes, yes,
what are
yes.
some food tech startups that you're kind of looking at?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned that one earlier, the Ish
Ish,
company, like
yeah,
for,
wow.
yeah, for seafood. It was, I've covered a lot of these, and um, and so it's kind of impossible to pick, just some of the promising, because I feel like sort of everyone is promising in a way, but like the Ish company is one that came out earlier this year with some funding and just a long pipeline of products, like over 25, which I thought was quite impressive. I mean, they're really going to corner kind of the traditional seafood market with their products. I mean, they've got stuff, in the works, from, like, shrimp, scallops, salmon. I think you kind of, if you name it, they probably have something going on in it that's coming soon. Um, I think more recent, like in the plant-based space, Rebellious is doing well. I also covered Imi, which is, they're kind of taking on the ramen industry with plant-based
Hmm.
noodles.
Interesting.
Yeah, and like in the cheese category, like everybody loves cheese. Better Dairy is trying to replicate harder cheeses, which is a bit, I've been told that's a bit harder to do. Like, soft cheese is kind of a little bit
Mm.
easier to um get the get it to, kind of form, but hard cheeses is something that's a little bit more difficult. And Climax Foods is also something that, a company that's doing something similar in that space. And so I think that, all of those companies are doing some really cool things. And so, we'll see more of that going
I
forward.
like the branding that like each has, right? It's like because they're like just for some context for our listeners. So basically, so they have like this big, like Christine said, like this big line of products, and like when you like they call their shrimp product, they call it shrimpish.
Yeah.
Salmon, salmonish. Like so, they're
Yes.
like no, it's not the real thing, but they,
Yes. Yes. It's
I like
ish.
it.
It's
It's
ish. It's
ish.
ish. It's
I like it. I like that they're like
yes.
they're honest about it and they're like playing with it. And like
Yes.
the cheese thing, I actually didn't know that. I'm actually dairy free. So like that's a good solution for me as well, right? If and
Yes.
hard cheeses,
Yes.
which for when I was young, I was big on cheese, and then I stopped eating cheese. But hard cheeses are really tasty.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I'm a big hard cheese fan, so that it'll I'm looking forward to being able to taste some of this.
What are some barriers to adoption? Do you think some of those food tech startups have?
I think one of the big ones has been the case for a while now, is just scaling. Some companies, as I mentioned, they can make a whole cut of meat, but others are still kind of at the stage of taking a few days to produce a really small amount of
Wow.
that similar thing. And so once that changes, I think especially with the increase in infrastructure, which unfortunately, anytime that you talk infrastructure, that's like a big capital expenditure. Once that kind of changes, that probably should help with the scaling. Um and even with that, kind of, even though we've had companies raise funding toward that infrastructure, it still takes a year or two for a company to site plan and build a manufacturing facility, and then more time to get it up and running. So I think that anybody who says, oh, we're going to build a facility, I think it's going to be like 2 years before you see the facility actually open, and then more time for them to actually get all of them equipment up and running and getting scaling to a certain capacity. Along those same lines too, what we've talked about as well, is like taste and texture also seems to be a factor. Though, like, depending on who you ask, some of the early products didn't actually taste so good, but the investors saw kind of the potential in the team and have stuck with them anyway. So I think taste and texture are going to definitely be ones that it's going to take a bit to still figure out. I mean, there's people who said, founders who said that they've really kind of cracked the code on taste and texture, but we're not going to get to see it until they're at a point where they can actually manufacture it to where it gets in front of us. I think also consumer behavior when it comes to eating meat. One of the things that I noticed, I got a study that I read, and I'm blanking on where I got it from, but there are a lot of founders in the food tech area that are kind of vegan or vegetarian, and I think while that's awesome, and I know that a lot of the sustainability factors and things like that of people who want to protect animals from being slaughtered, or not that many we don't have to have that many animals in our ecosystem and things like that, or just wanting to prevent the way that animals are being used for food. But I think I think we're going to need some more meat eaters to convince folks that the products are good. Like, I think we're going to need more. I'm not sure that someone who's vegan who hasn't eaten meat in like 10-20 years is going to inspire dedicated meat eaters to try products. I think there's going to need to be like someone like me, or some people who like love meat and eat it a lot, to convince the people that it's actually good, and it would be something that they would replace traditional meat in their diet with. I
It's
think it's going to
interesting.
be.
It's interesting. Probably a lot. I'm just like thinking as like a marketer. I'm thinking like probably some of this startups are probably gonna like, hook up with like carnivore influencers or something, right? To just kind of like,
Yes.
to like test products and stuff.
Yes, I really think that they're going to need that, because they're going to need somebody who says, I normally eat a big steak, but I've tried, XYZ company, and I can't tell the difference. So I think they're going to need that. I really do think that they're going to need that, because I think there's people who, just scrunch up their nose at the thought of eating something like that, something that isn't made with actual meat. So I think it's going to take some good creativeness to get the word out.
What about, like you mentioned earlier, about the price point? Like you mentioned, you gave the eggs as an example, right? Like,
Yes.
but right now, like plant-based stuff and a lot of things that the food tech industry are producing, they're quite expensive. Like for instance, when I
Yes.
go to pizza and I order like a vegan pizza, right? Because I don't want to eat the cheese, it's like
Hmm.
it's increasingly more expensive. Like, what do you
Yes.
think? Do you think like there's a way to like overcome this kind of barrier in the upcoming years or something?
Yeah, I think that is one, definitely, is the pricing. I think when it's still $50 a pound for meat, I don't think it's gonna get, I think you're gonna have to get it down to, $7-8. And what's interesting is that the pandemic helped a bit, because food prices were raised. I mean, they're still raised now. So I mean, I think that the pricing gap is narrowing. But I think there's still going to have to be, I think I think it's the growth media is like one of the highest costs for, cultivated meat and other alternative meat producers. So I think that some of those costs are going to have to go down on the actual like raw materials for the overall price to come down, I think.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we're gonna see like what do you think is like the next big thing in food tech then? Do you think it's gonna have to do
Oh.
with kind of like making prices more affordable through some sort of the production process, or what do you think is like the next big thing in food tech? Like,
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I do think that there's, like I said, there's companies that are working on, growth media that to make it, even better for us, like more, healthier for us. They're also working on bringing the costs down. So like, they're saying we can, maybe where it was like $100 per pound or liter or
mm,
something. I think that they do it by liters. It could be $100 per liter, and we're trying to bring it down to like $20, which I think that's still something that's being worked on, and a lot of those companies in that are working on that received maybe seed funding, like $1 million in seed funding like a couple of years ago. So I don't know how long it takes to get that production going, or what kind of other sort of funding would be needed by them in order to scale that so that they can meet the demand of all of the companies that are needing that growth media.
mm-hmm. Interesting, really
Yeah.
interesting. Kristen, you've been like very like thank you so much for taking the time. I do have a few several more questions.
Sure.
More to kind of optimize my writing process actually. So I also write for Yahoo Finance, Tip Ranks, Forbes, and other publications. And
Mm-hmm.
I've always kind of admired your writing, and
Oh,
just
thank
like
you.
the speed, right? Like this element of like optimizing the speed. And I was telling like my friend last week, I was like, how can I like, maybe ChatGPT can help me become like a writing machine, like how Christine or how Kyle writes and all those people. And I'm like, but they don't use ChatGPT
No,
to do, they don't use
no,
that. They
no,
don't
no.
use ChatGPT. So like, what has been like your writing process this last several years, and how did you
Yeah.
like optimize it?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think you just kind of sit down and go. I mean, I'm sure if you read a lot of my stories, especially funding stories, you'll see that they're kind of formulaic. And I've been trying to expand on that and not be so this paragraph is the same, this paragraph, and just kind of more, trying to do more storytelling if I can. Not every story lends itself to being a storytelling format, but for, a lot of times I just try to give, put up some interesting things, maybe pull in some trends, other companies that are doing it. But yeah, I mean, writing quickly, I there are people who write even more quickly than I do, so I'm not even sure I could say that. I just am, if I know that I have, things on my list, if I'm, writing a bunch of stories, then I really work to get them done, and that's probably why you see it kind of going quickly, is because I um just try to I'm somebody who just likes to cross things off of my list, and so I can do that, like if you like, I think for me a lot of times is I have some playlists, on like Spotify that I listen to that are like, I know that these songs are like an hour long, so if I put them on, I'm like, I have an hour to write this one story, and then I
Hmm.
kind of move on. And so I think that that's sort of the mindset, and once you kind of get over the hurdle of some of like maybe figuring out what your headline is or figuring out the first paragraph, everything just kind of really sort of falls into place afterward, and so you can kind of finish up really quickly after that. But I do kind of sit around with the headline and the first couple of paragraphs trying to figure out what to do, how I want to get into the story. So sometimes that
I,
takes a little while.
After like that first paragraph, do you feel like you're in a flow state? Like the words are just popping in,
Yes.
words are just coming.
Yes.
Wow, that feels
Yes.
good, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. And I think too, I used to do this and I still do this to an extent, but I try to do an interview and then kind of sit on it for a bit and then do writing. But sometimes I found that writing goes faster if I do an interview and then I sit down and write the story right then, like after I'm done with the
Hmm.
interview. Like I take some time to, a little bit of time to process, but while all of that stuff is fresh in my mind, I find that the writing goes faster. It moves faster when
Hmm.
I am
Interesting.
thinking about things. Yeah.
You
But it could
mentioned
also be opposite. Yeah.
you mentioned like crossing things on your list. Do you
Yeah.
have like a physical to-do list? Like how do you do that? Do you use an app? Do you use like pen and
No.
paper?
I have a calendar. A calendar
Nice.
that, yeah, a physical paper calendar. I guess it's, I don't know if you want to call it an agenda or I don't know, a planner. It's probably a planner. And I have it, and it's by week, and I write down what stories are due when, um and go from there. So I'm definitely a pen and paper list maker for sure.
Love it. Is there any books or anything like any other resources you think I can check out in terms of like writing or like writing better,
Um,
faster,
oh goodness.
something that have
You
helped you
know,
throughout your journey, maybe?
I was trying to think. Yeah, I mean, I think I've learned a lot over my journalism journey. Um, and I really think the best thing, and I don't, it's not even in a book, it's just something that somebody taught me a long time ago. And I kind of mentioned it a little bit about kind of, writing as you go. And I think there's a lot of stories where you can kind of take maybe a press release, or you can take some kind of historical data or knowledge or something that you've researched before you sit down, and you probably could like really go through the story or whatever it is that you're writing, and have paragraphs. But then, if you're talking to somebody, you can insert like, okay, question here, what about this, and then you could kind of write a little bit more about something else, and then have a question. And by the time you get done, and by the time you've talked to the person, you pretty much have the story you
Hmm.
know done as a result of that, because um you've gone through some of the things that you wanted to include. And then, if they say something that reminds you of something else, or like, oh wait, hey, I need to go look up that certain information, I'll put in parentheses, like in my notes, look this up, or something like that, or find more information on this, or ooh, I remember somebody else wrote it, a colleague wrote this story on there, and so you can put that in there, and to
Hmm.
link back or something. And so I think it's just a matter of like, I think writing as you go is like a really good idea. And I'm not the best at following that, but I think it really does help. But that did not come from a book. That came from a person. It was like teaching us how to write better. So
It's like being on the move, right? It's like being in a constant flow state, taking things. Yeah, I imagine that's how Kerouac, Jack Kerouac, right, on the road, and so I loved his books, and he wrote in spontaneous prose, so he would in prose, so he would like he would go into flow states. Um,
yes.
so like my last question for you, ChatGPT, we have to say something about that.
Okay.
Thoughts? What do you think about it? Like, do
Yeah,
you
we were
think
just talking about that.
do you think you're going to use it in some way or in some form? Maybe not GPT-4, but maybe GPT-16 or like the or something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is an opportunity to say never.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I think right now it's still in a position where it's not telling you correct things. Like I've even had it where it says, well, I only know up to 2021. And it's like, okay, well, all right then. So I don't know. Yeah, that I'm not sure that I would use it for my writing, but um I mean, I think that there's some things that are similar. Like I think Grammarly helps you sort of like that, where I mean, even Google Docs will help you. Like, oh wait, I think you meant to say put this word, like it
Yeah.
it kind of stops you. It's like, wait, maybe you meant this word. So I mean, I think there's a lot of there's a lot of things being done behind us, like if you misspell a word, it'll be like, oh, I think you meant, I think you meant this word. And so it changes it. Um, so one of the things that I don't like, I think, about Google Docs is it will sometimes change the word, and I did notice that it changed the word and changed it to
Mm.
something that the wrong word, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. And I didn't catch it until later on in the process. But like ChatGPT, I don't know, but I don't know. I'm kind of like,
You're careful.
yeah, I'm really, yes, exactly. I'm pretty careful with it. We've talked about it, at work, about not necessarily helping us with our writing, but like, if our kids are using it for school, or something like that. And I think that we've all come to the conclusion that, I think careful is is a really good word for that. I think we're all being very careful about how we decide to use it, if we decide to use it. Um, but I mean, I think a lot of the stuff, like any kind of technology, I think a lot of things are here to stay, and this is probably one of them. So,
Hmm.
if we decide to use it in writing, I don't know. I feel like in some ways you can ask ChatGPT to like write in this voice, and it's like, but is it really your voice?
Hmm.
It's so I think that we all need to keep our voices when we write, and
It's
I'm
in,
not sure ChatGPT is gonna do that.
it's interesting because someone can, maybe I shouldn't say this, but someone can use a prompt and say, write like how Kristen Hall writes, write me this article, right?
Yeah.
It's not gonna be
Right.
the same thing. It's not.
Yes. No. And I think if you tried that now, ChatGPT would be like, who's Christine Hall?
I don't think
So
so. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think it knows
so
you, Christine.
yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll have to, yeah, I need to experiment maybe.
After this call, I think that's the first thing you're gonna do, right? Like, uh,
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see how it
We'll
plays
see.
out. We should be
Yeah.
careful, though. Every writer should be careful.
Yes. Yes. Because I think that people read your stuff because because they know how you're going to write it, how you're, if you're conversational, if you're, however it is that you like to write. I think people read you for certain aspects, and I think that if you employ other means to writing, I think you're going to lose that.
It's also there's a subtle thing once you're writing, like, it's not even in the words, it's like in the structure. Like, people know it's a human, and like ChatGPT is far away
Yes.
from that, like far away.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
Awesome, Christine. Thank you so much for taking the time. Love chatting. Keep
Yeah.
up the doing the amazing work you do. I'm gonna
Thank you.
continue reading your articles. I actually have a tab called like
Oh, nice.
on your profile, right? On your
Thank you.
uh,
Yeah. No, I appreciate that.
awesome, Christine. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.